Good morning. I hope you're all recovering from your Facebook cocktails. This morning's session, I'll keep this brief, is based around data design and innovation. We're going to be looking at how all that wonderful data that's out there within our networks, within our products and services, can help us think about our future design and innovation around our M4D services. And with that, I'm going to introduce the panel. First off, we've got Denis Guibard. Do you want to step over this? From Orange. And then we have Yaya N'djore from Tigo in Tanzania. And then we have Tim Murdoch from Cambridge. And last but certainly not least, Jesse Moore from M-KOPA. And Adam Wills will be, from our MDI team, will be mentoring, moderating this panel. Thank you.
No? Any noise? Ah, noise, great. Okay, so I'll start again. Welcome to the panel 3 on data design and innovation. I just want to introduce this panel with a few very basic points and then get to the panelists very quickly. The first point I want to make is that what's interesting in this space is we can expect mobile customers to be consuming more data in developing regions of the world. And what's interesting about this is that they'll also be producing more interesting customer insight data going forwards. Of course, this is part of a more global trend where we've seen over the last 5 years really sharp increases in customer usage of their data, largely driven by smartphone users in developed markets. Of course, though, this is still a trend that we're still seeing in developing markets. The two really important caveats to this picture are that, first, the kind of typical users of mobile for development services who are typically low-income rural users aren't yet having much of an impact on this picture, but we do expect that to change. The second most important point about this is that it's not really about customers' usage of data, but the fact that they start producing insight data that we can use and understand their behavior through that's interesting. There's still an important so what question around this, though. Why do we care about data in mobile for development? In short, the reason this is interesting because as low-income users become less data poor, we also have a really interesting opportunity to be able to use this data that they produce to improve their end-user experience, and that's really something I hope we talk to a lot today. When we think about the concept of the economic pyramid, we talk about low-income and high-income users as two types of users whose end-user experience is equally valuable. And what's exciting about mobile is that as users at the bottom of the economic pyramid start to use mobile, we start to collect interesting data points, such as payment data, their core usage patterns, and location data and so forth. The question around this, though, is what we need to be doing with this data. I'm just seeing the slides are a little bit skew-if, but what we really need to be doing is working out how we can improve the end-user experience with this data. We also need to appreciate that it's not always as easy as we might think to get access to this data, and so forming useful partnerships around access to data will be increasingly key. What I'm actually most interested in, though, is what's actually required to do something useful with this data in terms of the skills, processes of analysis, and people. So at MDI, we've been really thinking about where do different players in the M4D space focus their efforts around data. And what we're seeing is that different organizations are taking quite different kinds of approaches to utilizing the value of the data they have. What we really want to do today is try and understand some of the different benefits between these approaches. MDI also houses our own open access data portal where we're tracking over 1,500 products and services in the mobile for development space. But what's of interest to me today is that for most of these, if not all of these services, the question of how they can improve the end user experience through the use of their data is a pertinent one. So this is where I really want to hand over to our panelists today. And again, slightly getting cut off by the slides, but we've got Denis from Orange talking about the Big Data for Development Challenge. We've got Jesse from M-KOPA talking about how they are using business analytics to really improve and sort of drive the service to the next level. We've got Tim talking about some of his experiences with the link of design and data on M-Pesa. And we've also got Yaya to talk about some of his work in Tanzania on an agri project. So without further ado, one housekeeping exercise on format as well. Sorry. What we're going to do is have each panelist run through a very short presentation, and I'll ask the leading question. But in the sort of spirit of keeping these sessions interactive, I want to open up questions straight after that. So if you do have burning questions to ask the panelists after their presentation, please make yourself known to our mic holders, who I believe are Amol and, where is Ollie? Ollie's over here. So yeah, please ask the questions, but we'll have about 10 minutes before we go into the next presentation, and then we'll try and catch all the remaining questions at the end. So I'd like to now hand over to Denis, who's going to talk about the Orange Data for Development Challenge.
Thank you, and good morning to all. Short presentation on big data is quite a challenge. So what I'm going to present is what we call the Data for Development Challenge that Orange has been running since the beginning of this year. It should be moving here. And it's getting started, and this idea is coming from two main points if we step back a little bit. One is our approach to supporting social and economic development in the country. We call it Orange for Development. I do not have time to go in depth into that. That's a crossing of CSR and business, doing our infrastructure, developing value-added services, and that's where the challenge falls in, contributing to the innovation and the digital ecosystem in the country. And the second thing is our big data approach, which is at the group level, and not specifically on the Data for Development Challenge, but the Data for Development Challenge is one piece of it. You can see it on the right-hand side corner at the bottom. So we have three approaches. Internal use of all the data we have on our customer to improve their customer experience. A user-centric service, which means giving back the power to the user on the data we have, and we are building a kind of dashboard to help the user get back to his data, and developing database services, either on a business approach or on an open data approach, and that's what we did with the Data for Development Challenge. And of course, all that has to be built on a strong privacy policy, otherwise you don't get the trust of the end user to use their data. So, the Data for Development Challenge that we started by the end of 2000, that we started mid-2012, and for which the results were issued on the 1st of May 2013, is really the idea of giving raw materials, data from our network to, of course, anonymized and aggregated, to researchers, and to ask them, with all this data, it's not yet finished. So, what can you do that is good for and that is benefiting the local population, in our cases, in Ivory Coast? And we built that not only on Orange side alone, but we built a team, including university, to run the challenge of the contest. So it's Belgium University, University of Louvain, MIT, which is maybe better known than University of Louvain, but it's quite famous university in Belgium. And we wanted to have applications that were having a scientific approach, of course, that are leading some societal impact, and we also wanted to, and we were asking the applicant to show how they can visualize the data, because when we are facing this huge amount of data, it's very important to have a way in which we can provide the information in an easier way than just the data themselves. So that's the raw material we were using, that's Ivory Coast. Few figures were speaking big data. So we've been providing the call detail record for voice and SMSs for a period of 5 months, which means it's 2.5 billion records from 5 million users from 1,250 base stations. I don't know how many gigabytes it turned out to be. And then we anonymize this data and we aggregate them, and then we put that data, we gave that data to the applicant. Well, we had a much more complex process than that. Actually, we said, okay, we're going to do that, and we were requesting university and research team to tell us, what do you think you are going to do with that? Then we put terms and conditions, including about the usage of the data, the privacy, and then we signed the terms and conditions with 160 universities and teams, and we ended up having 83 applications on the challenge. Well, that I may not have time to tell you the detail of the type of data we gave, but you have that in the slide. And we got results in a very wide variety of domains. And that's just a few examples regarding population, tourism, healthcare, transportation, economic indicator, alerting. You have all the idea there. So we had quite a challenge with our international jury to get the 4 winners in the 4 categories. That's what we got. And just to have some fun, we put that into French, just to explain the price. So but you have in the slide again, it's in part the detail at least of 2 of them. The first prize out of the 4 categories, the number 1, which was granted $3,000, which is not the important thing, it's really the recognition of the work that is important for this team, was based on how malaria is propagating and how we can see from the mobile data the way in which malaria is propagating and how we can handle the disease control. Then we got 2 other categories, the best development, the best scientific. The best development was related to mobility and transport. And we can see again from the data we get from the mobile how people are moving, and that can have an impact on the transportation system planning, for instance. And we also got the best scientific, which was on the social network, and the best visualization. We do not have time to show you how it is, but I encourage you to go, there are some of these applications and pictures that are on the site. And I think that's more or less what I have to say in the time I am having. And we can spend much more time to discuss that.
So obviously, thank you for that whirlwind presentation of a big topic. I think before we go to the questions from the floor, one of the things I wanted to ask you about on behalf of Orange was the commercial follow-up and sort of the logical next steps of this kind of challenge. So we looked, for example, at IBM's research contribution where they were looking at transport mapping in Côte d'Ivoire. But exactly how does Orange plan next steps for taking these kinds of research findings into sort of valuable products and services for users in Côte d'Ivoire? And I suppose the next question that I'd like to segue into that is that we have people like Jesse and other players in the M4D space who may be interested, or other players might be interested in this data. How exactly are people going to be able to partner with Orange in future to get access to this valuable kind of data?
Well, for one, it was already done in partnership, so we cannot do that alone. And if we want to use the data in a specific area like urban planning or disease management, we are, of course, to do that with the expert in the area. So in any case, anything we do with that will be in partnership. Then there are 2 options. Either we stick to an open data approach as a research work, and we may still need to get some insight on how we handle the data. For instance, we had, and I had no time to explain that, we had a lot of discussion and back and forth discussion with the team about the anonymization and the protection of the data. And by the way, just to be sure we were strong on that, we asked 2 universities, we gave them the data and we asked them, crack it. Try to find back who is behind this call. And doing that with them, we improved and strengthened the protection of the data we were providing to the other team. So there is still work to be done on how to handle this type of data to see what are the areas where they can be applied. So we may be running a new version of this challenge in a different country, in a different way. I don't know. We are thinking about that. And of course, on the other end, because as I said, that is also going to be turned into businesses. So we are starting to discuss and to work on projects. I cannot tell you which one and where and when. That's part of the business and the commercial activity, but we're starting to work on projects that can be implemented, still keeping in mind that we're going to use the data we're getting from the network for social benefit with partners, but maybe in a business approach.
I'd like to sort of bring it out to the audience now, and maybe we've got a question here.
Hi, it's John from Lab Green Networks. My question is going to be on the governance side of analytics. So from a maybe group as well as the OPCO angle, how are you governed in terms of, you have an analytics department at the OPCO level who does the entire CDR analysis, or you have, the information is being sent to France, and then there's a group over there that's taking care of the entire analysis?
Well, that has been mainly managed by people from the corporate in France, where we have our main R&D. But we've been working, as I said, with MIT, with the University of Louvain, with a local university in Ivory Coast as well, to work on the data. But, it's a very specific knowledge to be able to gather the data, anonymize them by transforming the number, possibly switching slightly the location of the BTS not to get too much too precise information, and then aggregating it at the appropriate level for, it's a trade-off. You have to aggregate and anonymize to protect the privacy, but the more you do that, the less relevance you get from the data. So this expertise is really in a central point or in a central team that may be split over several places, but mainly at the headquarters of the group.
I mean, before we turn to Jesse's presentation, I thought that Tim might have an interesting question here, having worked in the space.
Yeah, I'm really interested in what you're doing. I think the initiative is a great initiative. And I'm interested in how the user has access to their own data and what they can do with that. So, for example, I'd love to be able to say, this is my call records. I will give those call records to that finance company to get a loan.
So, for now, and you understand from my presentation, we are not managing call record at the individual level.
Yeah.
And that was not the intent. It was really to have some statistics and aggregation. For now, then we may have legal obligation according to the various country to keep for some period of time the call record from one person. That's just for legal reasons. We do not issue to anybody any personal record so far.
Even to me, my own record.
So far, no, except that you can get, if you have the detailed billing, you get this type of record. But it's not presented in the way because you may not know on your bill from which base station, for instance, you were calling. But from which cell. But that's, apart from that, you get the detail of your call just for billing purposes.
So, yeah, if there are further questions for Denis on this, we'll hopefully have time to come to them at the end. But I'd like to pass now to Jesse, who's going to tell us a little bit about the M-KOPA platform and how that's really helping them with their business development.
Thanks. And Denis, I think you should come to Kenya next. So we don't have the mountain views, but I think what you guys are doing would be great in Kenya. So if you can come to Kenya.
I was in Kenya 2 months ago.
Well, come back next week. We'll get involved. That would be really cool. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. We are very much a data-oriented business, but the data I'll go through here and how we use it is on a very different level, I think, than what you just saw. So I hope it's relevant. Let's see how we get along. The first thing I need to do is, for those who don't know what our company does, I need to give you a very brief explanation, and I am going to be apologizing here for how my mobile phones are still on, and it's interfering. I do need to give you an orientation to what the business does, and I know it won't make a ton of sense because when we meet investors, we have to go through 3 meetings before they even get what our business model is. Sorry that you're going to get it in less than 10 seconds. But basically, we lease solar power to low-income people who can't afford electricity and are off the grid. That's a massive market. We do this in partnership in Kenya with Safaricom, therefore M-PESA. We collect all of our revenue from M-PESA. We do the distribution of the solar products through shops. We do the ongoing service, which is really by phone calls to customers. And we do credit provision. So in the end of the day, we're much like a bank. We're giving every customer a product that they can't pay for up front in exchange for an IOU that says, yes, I'll pay you back over time. We do that with an embedded security technology, which is based on SIM cards. So SIM cards go inside the solar units, and that's the way we can basically control them based on payment. We started this in 2010, and we now have over 200 staff, 750 points of sale, and we're adding about 1,000 homes to solar every week in Kenya. To give you the numbers by year, and I think this is important to the data discussion, because data is very relevant at each stage of growth. We did 400 odd units in 2010. That was our pilot, and there was a ton of data that we got then, and some of it was numerical, other was much more qualitative, going to talk to people, but that data led to, we think we can turn this into a real business. Last year we did about 4,000 sales. Most of those were at the very end of the year because it took a long time to get the technology right before we launched, but we launched last October. And this year we're going to do, we've already done about 40,000 sales so far. We'll probably net out around 50,000 by the end of the year. But at each of those intervals, you get more data, which is exciting, but then you also get, less flexible because you have to build something that can execute against an agenda of 40,000 sales. These are what the products look like. We've just introduced the one on the right, which is at 50 shillings a day. But basically, either of these systems, which are very high-quality solar products designed by D-Light, they provide lighting and they provide phone charging, and the new one also provides a radio. And that's the basic power needs of our target market. They really want a bit of music and the news. They want to be able to charge their phones, and they want to be able to light their homes. And they want to get off of kerosene, which is a really dirty, really unhealthy, and really expensive, crappy energy substitute. So our proposition is spend less money, get solar, and get it in an affordable way, and that's why we're scaling relatively well. To get to the data, oh, sorry, these are just photos to sort of illustrate how it works, but I'll blow through this and come back to it later. Now, data-wise, we run a platform that really makes this whole business work. It's called M-KOPA. It's our baby. We're perpetually building and rebuilding it, and it gathers a lot of intelligence upon which we can provide credit to consumers and grow. These are some of the numbers of the data coming in, and I will be the first to say we are not taking advantage of our data as well as we can. We're just so busy trying to grow the company that there's more data than we can really analyze. But for example, we add about 5,000 customers. These are estimates for November. We'll add about 5,000 customers this month. We'll do about 45,000 phone calls to customers this month. We'll do 160,000 M-Pesa transactions, which will make us the third biggest user of M-Pesa in the world. Within another month, we'll be the second biggest, and ironically, the biggest user of M-Pesa is the electricity company. So we hope to overtake them in 2 or 3 years' time. We get about 1.2 million geographic location reports every month, and we get 115 million voltage readings off batteries. This is not something we're doing much with yet, but let me show you some stuff in the system. So this is the most important thing to me, and certainly to our CFO. This is all the payment information. This is taken last night at 6 o'clock, so we signed up 170 customers yesterday. The amount of revenue that came in, the amount of active accounts, and as a bank of sorts, we really have to be monitoring all the payments and making sure that our credit risk is good. This is a customer screenshot, which is used by our call center people to call the customer and engage with them. And I can see here that Lillian, and I've blocked out her last name and her ID number, but Lillian has paid us 4 times 1,200 shillings per month, which is what she owes every month. This is a very unusual but terrific customer. She's probably salaried, and she pays us almost religiously every month on the 15th, the full amount for the rest of the month. This is some of the voltage information we get. So I think we're probably the biggest gatherer of data about batteries in Africa anyway, if not in the world, because we have 40,000 batteries that we're getting readings off of every 15 minutes, and this is her battery over the last 7 days, both the panel charge coming in and the discharge going out. We can infer from that if her panel is dusty. We can infer from that if she turns her lights on at 7:50 or 8 p.m. and how bright the lights are and what kind of phone she's charging. So whether we can use that data in the future, we'll see. We get the geographic locations based on base stations, so these are where our customers are. You can see many of them have taken Kenyan-sold systems into Uganda, into Tanzania. We don't see them when they move to Somalia, but I know there are some up there. And then finally, there's data which doesn't necessarily get system generated, but to us it's very important to talk to our customers. And so we just did a survey. There's some great results we just got in terms of how the product is rewarding for customers. And I think it's another point of how you take that sort of data and improve product design going forward. So that's it.
Thanks, Jesse. And I think my first question here is, there's so much great data that you're collecting on the M-KOPA system, but would you call this an exercise in big data?
So I guess it depends how you define big data.
Yeah. But let's put it another way. Is it of the same kind of scale that Denny was talking about with billions of customer CDR records?
Yeah, I can't give you any Bs yet. No billions in our records. We get to the 100 million level, and that's it. So you could define big data as billions. What I think of as big data is that somebody like a mobile network operator is generating a ton of data, and they want to look for patterns in that may lead to what, and I think the example of Orange's initiative is great, because there's an interest in providing social benefit, potentially business benefit, but you're opening up data sets and you're saying, somebody please crunch these things, and you need really smart people from MIT and the MIT of Belgium to do the regressions analysis that give you some output. That to me is big data, and I don't think we're big data. Maybe one day we will contribute big data and be able to do something like what Orange is doing and get universities to crunch our numbers. But we're using data in a much more sort of basic business analytics fashion. I think one of the reasons we've been able to be successful so far as a growing company is that we manage ourselves in real time on the data we're getting. And if you catch me any other time except for when I'm on stage, I'm probably logged into the MIS watching payments come in religiously and calling our tech team when I can see, hey, there hasn't been a payment for 5 minutes, there must be something wrong, let's go figure that out. So we've been extremely data-driven in the way that we run and pivot and deliver the business, and I think that's been great as hopefully an innovative company from the start, but it's not big data to me.
And then as a follow-up to that, could you just sort of give us an example, really telling example from recent times with M-KOPA as to how you have used that data to pivot and to refine the business model?
Yeah, so probably the biggest pivot we've had in our business so far is around deciding to give a customer credit. And we used to do quite a bit of work to try to screen customers, and well, we thought going in, if you're going to give these solar systems to people, you're really going to have to get some background on them, interview them, get some core data before you make the decision to issue credit, and that's basically proven to be false. I think the design of our product and the affordability of it and the repayment rates that we've seen have allowed us to basically say there is no such thing as credit screening. We'll take anybody. There is a deposit price that has to be paid. You do have to have a phone number. You have to be able to pay us by M-Pesa. If you can do those three things, we'll take you on as a customer. And so it was the data that after 4 or 5 months, the repayment rates were strong enough. We said, we can get rid of any of the traditional credit barriers here and just let anybody in. And that has some costs. Our repayment rates will probably go down over time as we do that. But the upside is all of a sudden we can take on any single customer, and most of the banks won't touch those guys. So if we can build a credit history on Lillian, maybe that'll be also useful to somebody else in the future, or especially to her.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have that much time, but a couple of questions from the floor would be really interesting at this stage. Does anyone have any questions to get me? Well, I suppose, Tim, actually, I know you have some kind of questions that you're quite interested to ask.
I'm always the one that seems to be doing. I love what's going on here, and actually there's really similar corollary of what we're doing in the early days of M-Pesa, and where this goes is just fabulous. And I think we were talking earlier about how to roll this out somewhere else, and you needed to be so connected in to Safaricom to make this work. I'd like to hear a bit about trying to roll that out in a different place.
Yeah, so we have great relationships with Safaricom. It's because a lot of our team used to work with Vodafone and Safaricom and M-Pesa. We've got a lot of former employees from Safaricom who work now at M-KOPA. So there's almost a familial relationship there, and that's really been helpful as we've scaled. We've designed this business speaking of design and innovation, we designed a business that we knew could work on M-Pesa and could work with Safaricom in Kenya. We think it can work with other mobile operators in other markets with a few qualifiers. It would be great that there's mobile money because it's a lot cheaper to collect mobile money payments than it is off airtime, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the possibilities are strong, and we're talking with a number of operators and looking to go into other markets eventually. We probably could be doing that now, but we've also felt it's such a big market in Kenya, and while all this technology and all this data is fun and great and so exciting, under all this there's a crap load of boring operational, HR, finance stuff that has really gone on, and it's difficult to replicate the delivery. I think this is, just like M-Pesa, this is really enabled by technology, but made possible by just fervent focus on detail and execution. That's the difference, in my view, from M-Pesa in Kenya and mobile money in a lot of other markets. It's just, regulation, there's other things. But in the end of the day, Safaricom did an excellent job executing, and I hope we're going to do the same thing first in Kenya. If we do that job well, I hope other mobile operators in other markets will bring us on as partners to execute there too.
Great. Well, this is the perfect segue into Tim, who's going to talk exactly about the design and the data challenges faced in his work at M-KOPA back in the early days. So yeah, Tim, take us through that.
Thank you. I'm really pleased that we've had this conversation because it really sets very well the shape for our experiences on M-PESA. What I'm going to look at is not the data analysis that we did on M-PESA in the early days. We had a very similar sort of thinking about how people were transacting and what they were transacting for. But this is more about the shape of the process. How do we get under the skin of the customer? We've talked about user-centric design, and in a session later on, a bit of a plug, please do come along to a session later on this afternoon. We'll be looking a bit more about how we do that. But what I want to do is just give a sense of what we were tackling with M-PESA and some of the experiences that we had from that. So if you look at the shape of a mobile service, what you see and what everyone sees about M-KOPA, what everyone sees about M-PESA is really just the tip of the iceberg. What really goes on, and what Jesse was alluding to just then, is there's a huge amount that happens underneath the covers there. I need to make sure it points in the right direction.
What's going on underneath? Right
There we go. Yeah, exactly. Right, there we go. So now there's absolutely an iceberg, and what you see on the top is really only about 10%. And the key part of your creating a mobile service is when to address the rest of the 90%. And I'm sure that Jesse hasn't done it yet, and no one would do it until you actually go out to a full commercial system. When you start to scale, do you actually start to fill out that 90%? So the key is actually trying to work out what it is you have to do to actually get a service out there and get it working. Absolutely, you need to focus on the user experience. Getting a user experience that is sufficient to give a user a reasonable comfort that they know what they're doing, and actually a reason to use the service end to end is absolutely vital. So they've got to be comfortable, there's got to be a service that's end to end. And the service underneath, though, however, needs to be really simple, the bare minimum to make that work. Any more than that, you're just wasting your money and you're wasting your time. It makes it very hard later on, I'll come to that this afternoon about how hard that can be. But really, in the early stages of pilot, the focus is absolutely on the user experience with the bare minimum under there. But there's a slight warning there. Make sure you get the heart design of that bare minimum absolutely right. Because once you're up and running, once you started the pilot, you will not be allowed to stop the car, and you'll have to redesign that car and rebuild it without stopping it. It is a hard thing to do. So just a couple of simple examples. If we are thinking about your end user and you say, okay, we would like to understand how they work, and in M-PESA's case, it's sending money. How would you send money today? This is with us talking in 2005. So we'd send money by walking to a post office equivalent or putting it in the post. It would take 3 or 4 days to get there. I'd have to spend half an hour, maybe an hour, investing my time to do that, or certainly if I was receiving it. So we thought, okay, a 10-minute transaction, that's going to be fabulous. Everyone's going to love a 10-minute transaction. Actually, no way. They won't cope with that whatsoever. 6 seconds was an expectation. If it took longer than 6 seconds, then it wasn't working. That was because what we were comparing against the wrong thing. We were comparing against post and post office, whereas actually we should have been comparing against SMS, because that was the experience they had. So getting that right and actually getting the right measure is sometimes quite hard and not very visible at the beginning. One other example is really to build on that iceberg. It's absolutely fine to spend less on what's going on behind the scenes. In fact, it's imperative to spend less on what's going behind the scenes, because whatever you spend there will almost certainly be wrong. But you do need to absolutely put a lot of rigor into getting some of the right decisions for the customer experience. So what you put out there as a pilot needs to match what they need to do. It needs to have an end-to-end service, and it needs to be flexible. Those are vital things to get right. So you've got to put some rigor into that. And this afternoon we'll go through some processes that we used then and we certainly would use now in putting that together. But then when you do decide to launch, okay, you're just starting the journey. The work you've done, getting a nice pilot to be successful and everyone patting you on the back saying, yeah, we're going to go and launch it. Now the hard work begins, because that work to fill out the rest of that pyramid is really hard, and spend some time and even more rigor on getting that work to work. And the particular piece I would say, I mean, if we look at what what we did to M-Pesa, we absolutely reworked the system on a process-orientated back-office system. That worked, and that worked really well. I would argue that we're still struggling on M-Pesa today to pivot to the pivot for success. That's a really hard thing to do. It wasn't done sufficiently in the early days after launch. It's still going on now, and you can see, I think, through the changes in providers for that, what's going on there. And that pivot for success means two things. It means that the system struggles for scalability of transactions, but more importantly, the system struggles to bring third parties on to let your ecosystem, your merchants scale as well. So I think those are the key points. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Great. Well, if the audience can kind of think of any questions and make yourself known using the mic there. I wanted to come in with an initial question. So I really like your iceberg metaphor, and I think it's quite a nice way to sort of motivate the topic of user-centric design, which, to be honest, I think some of us may feel like is a bit of a buzzword, but without necessarily understanding what that means. But I kind of wanted to speak on behalf of the range of other kinds of players in the mobile for development space, not necessarily looking at mobile money or working with mobile money in Kenya. What kind of recommendations could you give to them to actually sort of filling out this iceberg metaphor as you've created it here?
Okay, sorry. I'm very quiet apparently. Yeah, just to go back to the range of other M4D service providers in the space, wanting to get involved with this concept of user-centric design, but not necessarily knowing where to start, not necessarily having the budget to go to IDEO or whoever is the great design consultancy on the scene. What kind of recommendations could you give to them to feasibly start working on this kind of process that seems so important?
Well, firstly, come along this afternoon, absolutely. It's the right thing to do. So, secondly, it's applying some rigor. The techniques that we use are actually relatively straightforward to do. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to get and understand how a stakeholder, how a user goes through a process. But you do need to go down into the detail, and you do need to apply the rigor. So give yourself the time and the focus and the space and access to stakeholders, so the end users in each of those situations. They may be the farmer, they may be the person receiving a loan, or they may actually be the call center representative. These are all stakeholders in the process. So consider what they have to do on a daily basis, and consider that in detail, and really measure what they do, and compare that against what you think they should be doing. That's actually really vital.
Okay, great. Do we have any questions in the audience to Tim, or anything you want to know about user-centric design? Would be a great time to ask. Yeah, Dawn? Maybe.
Hi, Tim. Be interesting just to get an idea of what your sample size was when you were doing the user experience process. How many people did you engage with, and what walks of life? Because you maybe had an anticipation at the outset as to who your target customers would be.
Yeah, and I think it varied on the type of user. So when we did the pilot for M-Pesa, we had about 200 to 400 people, and that was our end user group. And what we had to do there was choose a group that was self-contained. So we went to the microfinance community and built something for microfinance that was very different to mobile payments. And that's actually something that we'll talk about a bit later, is that building something that's complete may not be building the thing you will then launch. That's a different thing. So you need to focus on a relatively large sample size for your end customer. But when then you're talking about back office processes, literally sitting down, doing the old-fashioned thing and sitting down with one person and going through what they have to do, that's sufficient. And if you do that well and get a real person saying, okay, I need to do this, you'll get a lot of insight.
Yeah, we've got a question here.
And so just a quick follow-up to that is then how are you capturing that user data? Were you working with interviewers to capture that? Were you videotaping it? I guess how are you capturing that data?
The reality of the world is messy, and typically it was me sitting there with a notebook.
Cool. Yeah, we've got a question here.
Yes, Andrew Carlin from USAID. To what extent did you look at the intermediaries, the agent networks, the human interface between the client and the service?
We spent a lot of time considering the agents, actually, getting the agents right, and actually how the agents are then managed themselves. That took a lot of our energy and effort. But I think we didn't really get under the skin of that until after we launched, to be frank. We spent a lot of time thinking about it and preparing for it, but but we really didn't understand it until probably 2 or 3 months into launch, when we really put the effort in.
And as a follow-up, was that more an in-house activity from Safaricom, or was that, the third-party agent network management, or the management groups around that were instrumental, but that was really one of the first efforts around that?
Yeah, so we put the effort in internally, but then when we realized that people would come and want to aggregate and take that as a business, and that probably actually, to be fair, was about 12 months in after launch, then we really followed through with that. So following through on opportunities is vital, but you have to put the energy into all of your distribution, I think, is key.
Yeah, I was wondering about your any questions you would have for Tim about the role of designer and how you've seen that pan out in Tigo and Tanzania.
Yeah, sure. I think that, data is always a very good, important thing to look at when you're trying to design new services, because you want to make sure that you understand the customers, you want to make sure that you can predict the behavior of the customer, and to making sure that you can have a successful service and then you can increase the usage. So, of course, designing the service around the user needs is a constant and ongoing process. It never ends. You always have to go back to the user to make sure that the service is accessible, easy to use, and then obviously it's going to translate into great usage and revenues that you're going to look after.
Right. So I take it you're going to be going to Tim's session later on today?
Sure.
Okay, good. Again, this is a good segue as well for you to talk a little bit more about the Tigo Kilimo agri-service in Tanzania. So yeah, if you could just introduce that to the audience.
So I think much has already been said, and the panelists have already touched the most important points regarding big data and user-centric design. I'll just try to give you an approach from M&M Agri-Service and a much more tactical view on how basically you can use data to make sure that your service is successful. So what is Tigo Kilimo? Tigo Kilimo is the market information system, basically, which was launched in December 2012 and acquired virally without very little marketing, 4,000 customers just in 2 months after the launch. So what does it provide? It provides weather information, market price, and agro tips via SMS, USSD, and now IVR and call center. So in designing the service, as it was mentioned before, it's very difficult for a mobile network operator to gather all the data, so it's extremely important in the design of the service to have the right partners. So in the Tigo Kilimo service, basically we have 2 kinds of big partners. We have the upstream partners, that the partners that help basically take the service to life. And then you have the downstream partners, the partners basically that help the service reach the communities and the farmers that we're looking after. And then of course you have the technology and service partners that basically help us providing the content and the application that we use to refine and design the service. So just to keep it very short, on this slide, what you will see just 4 graphs that gives you a good overview of what the service is. So what is really important for us as a mobile network operator is basically to focus. It's always a good idea to focus on basically service usage and penetration. So in order to do that, as the service is in its very early stages, we basically want to know what kind of information is useful for the user, what kind of information is popular from the user. So the first graph basically tells you that market price has received 5,452 requests, and it's a much more popular type of information requested by the user. How do you use that? Then you're basically going to launch bundles, offers, targeted promotional offers centered around market price, just to make sure that people are going to find exactly what they need for. So if you want to drill down deeper, then you're going to look at what kind of user records market price. And if you look at the graph, which is just below the far left corner, you will see that we're basically segmented the market price request in terms of user. Then you look at the unique user request, and you also look at the female user request. Why it is important to understand what kind of user basically asks for the market price. Because basically we have a gender-specific approach in the design of the service. We want to make sure that as a mobile network operator, we can also target the women. And statistics show that approximately 2/3 of the unconnected people are women. So it's a good idea to try to design the service in a way so that it's useful for female users to get in and use the service as well. If you look at the other graphs, then you will see that you have a good understanding of the breakdown in terms of crops, okay, because we're talking about an M-Agri service, so it's always a good idea to see what is the most popular crop. And our assumption while designing the service was like maize was a very popular crop that people were growing in Tanzania, and data showed that to us. So it's always a good understanding from the user perspective and a good idea to send it to our bundles offers centered on the maize crop. So in a nutshell, it's always a good idea to try to refine the design of the service by tracking usage, by tracking retention, and by improving loyalty by better understanding what the user wants, how they want it, when they want it, and where they're located. We have geographical data as well, which is not presented here, but that give us a very good understanding of where the users are, what kind of crops they are growing, and then they're going to use that in the future to make sure that we have a better service. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks Yaya. I actually wanted to pick up on the very last thing that you said, and if any of the room have questions about this agri service, that would also be great to pose to Yaya. But looking at location-based services in particular, you haven't mentioned them here, but we know, for example, that you're using these location-based services to understand how to target customers for the appropriate weather information. I guess my question is, sitting inside an operator with access to potentially an amazing amount of information and the kind of content, tailored, localized content services that you could be delivering to farmers, what kind of opportunity do you see for actually using this location-based data to provide very tailored, localized content services and other kinds of services to these farmers? And how hard is it for you to leverage the kind of internal operator data to do these kinds of things using the agri service?
Sure. Location-based services is something that we're seriously looking at, and we plan to add to the location of the user some crop cycle data that are going to help us provide very targeted information to the farmers. For example, I'm going to tell to the farmers when it is the right time to start planting, when it's the right time to start growing, and what kind of basically behavior they should have based on weather and based on the location. So, of course, this is something that we're looking at very seriously, and we do think that by aggregating other crop cycle information and location base, we'll be able to be very close to the needs of the user on a location basis.
And how easy is it for you to get that data, aggregate it, and use it within Tigo?
It's not that easy because the information basically sits on different platforms. Let me give you an example. The kind of data that we're looking at the present time is basically to try to predict the behavior of the customer, like be in a position to say that this customer is going to churn in 3 months, going to churn in 6 months. So that's just one example. In order to do that, you cannot only use the information coming from the M-Agri platform, you have to aggregate it and to collate it to other information like basically the Apple behavior, like the reload behavior and location as well. So you put all those data together and then hopefully it gives you a good understanding of what's going to be the behavior of the customer. So the challenge is that the platforms are different, information is scattered, it doesn't sit on one platform. So you basically want to have one middle layer that helps you to basically aggregate all those data and be in the position to predict the behavior of the customer, which is something which is extremely important for us.
Okay. Are there any questions from the room from Yaya and any of the panelists? Yeah, we have one here.
Thank you for this presentation. Just 2 questions. The first is the price of the service. Are you charging the customer at the same price as other kind of services like entertainment or not? And the second question is related to the approach. Is it a pull or push? Which is you ask the customer to send a specific SMS at a specific time to get the information, or you ask him to subscribe on a monthly basis in order to get the information once it's ready?
Thank you very much. Basically, I'm going to start by a second question, push or pull. During the market research, because we did a market research, basically analyze what's going to be the best approach. So we started with a pull approach. But data has shown us that it's going to be a good idea to go through the pull, like the push approach, whereby the customer receives an SMS on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, depending on the kind of crop he has selected and based on his location. So we're basically moving toward this push approach, whereby the customer will subscribe. And let me just answer as well your first question. Of course, they're going to pay a very little fee on a weekly basis because it's a very short-term oriented market, so nobody will subscribe to a monthly bundle. So we're basically going to make it like daily or weekly. They're going to pay a small fee, something like $0.06, right, to basically get access to a bundle of information regarding weather, agro tips, and market price information.
So I think we're at a stage now where we've kind of heard from all of the panelists, and we've got a few questions around the room, but now can the audience feel free to ask any of the panelists a question. We'll just really try and open up some of the discussion, appreciating that we've gone through quite a range of different examples, people going into quite some detail at points. So just to get some general questions in the room would be great.
Thank you very much. I'm Peter Benjamin with the M-Health Alliance. My questions to Tim in particular around M-PESA. It's one of the issues that's been debated greatly. I'd be very glad to hear your input. Is basically why it hasn't scaled, M-PESA hasn't scaled so well in other countries outside Kenya. Some people say regulation, some people say the relationship with Safaricom or the unbanked nature of Kenya. But would you perhaps phrase it in what you're saying here, the design of the back-end systems and building the iceberg? Or what would you say are the factors why it hasn't scaled quite so well as it has in Kenya and many other countries in Africa and elsewhere?
I'll try and answer that one, I think. I've been asked that question quite a lot, and I think there are lots of elements of that answer already out there, and I think you mentioned a couple of them. I think Jesse mentioned the fact that actually it's hard work to do the work behind the scenes. And the iceberg principle has sort of come out from that conversation. For me, it is what goes on underneath the iceberg. And that has been one of the main reasons why it hasn't really flown, I think, elsewhere from an executional point of view. And I mean the technology and the integration and the execution around the team and the operations. That's probably been the thing that you can control that's not been done as effectively elsewhere. I think that's true. But I think there's a lot of things that are outside the control of the teams. And I think those are regulation. I think one of the big things about Kenya, which I tend to say in this situation, is they didn't see us coming. There was no friction. The banks didn't worry about us. They thought it was a hobby, literally. They thought it was a hobby. We had that comment at our board meeting at one point early on. The regulators sort of were benign. They said, okay, you're doing a European-style model, e-money model. Okay, we'll get on with that. So we got a lot of opportunity and freedom to operate, which I think a lot of other people are struggling with, a lot of other markets. But I think that's maturing, and I think that's moving on fast. So for me, I'm now looking for the next generation, and I'm really looking forward and appealing to any network operator out there, start interoperating, please, because that will open us out. And if you can lead that, that would be great. Because we really, if you start to interoperate, then I think all of these opportunities about opening out and scaling up to a real opportunity for mobile money around the world will just be huge.
We've got a question here.
Just a question for Denis then. What are the major barriers to interoperability?
Thank you.
Anyone can catch a question?
What are the major barriers to interoperability?
On the Orange Money, well, that's not the Orange Money, it's out of the M-PESA. Well, I think, but I'm not the expert, so I will be very cautious on that. First, each system is built a little bit on its own approach, which means the interoperability is not immediately. It's better to plan it before. That's what made the success of GSM compared to, because it was standardized before. That's one. Then it's something we will be keen to have interoperability in Kenya, for instance, because you cannot do anything except with M-PESA. But then it's a matter of the relationship and between the players. When one, at least in Kenya, I don't know if M-PESA and Safaricom are ready to interoperate because they have such a strong position. And when in the other country, it might be another operator building a strong position, thanks to their mobile banking system. You know, anybody in Kenya is having a Safaricom SIM card just because of M-Pesa, even if they have several SIM cards. So that's such a market power. So maybe the only way in that case could be some regulation forcing for the interoperability, rather than just having the market doing it, because there is such imbalance in some cases. But I think we will end up doing it because in the long term, I'm pretty sure it's the interest of all the players. But then you have to overcome some barrier in the short term, which is not, maybe you're not, well, that sounds I can make. Maybe it's not totally satisfactory.
I can give, I'm not an expert in MFS as well, but I think I can give the perspective of Tanzania. I think we're halfway. You can already send money from Tigo SIM card to a Voda SIM card, and you'll be able to retrieve the money, like to cash out at a retailer, but a higher fee, okay? So we're halfway. I think the major barrier, as he was talking about, like the bigger player are thinking about their power advantage, the network effect. So they just don't like to give away the network they invested. I think Safaricom has invested like dozens of millions of dollars in the network to making sure that the retailers were able to serve the customer. So they may not be like willing to give away that advantage. So that could be the major barrier. But I think the most important thing is from the regulatory side, whether the regulatory side is conducive, the environment is conducive or not, that's a bigger question.
So yeah, if I could jump in, I think the interoperability questions are interesting, but they're probably quite different from the range of things we're looking at here. So I was wondering if I could stimulate sort of questions in a different direction and throw one at Jesse. You looked at we showcased the M-KOPA net platform, and clearly when you're talking to your investors, this is quite a nice thing to show them, right? You also have different kinds of investors. You have more commercially focused and some with some more impact-minded goals. And I was just wondering if you could speak to the room a little bit about what it is the investors are actually impressed by and looking at when you're looking at the kind of metrics that come out of M-KOPA net, and whether there are really different kind of goals or interests when it comes to more socially minded or more commercially minded investors.
So socially minded investors prefer pie charts and commercial like graphs. So you just kind of skew the circles.
Right.
That's
so
pretty much what.
That's pretty much it. Okay, great.
Well, I think all investors or stakeholders, period, like data. And one of the beautiful things about M4D is you can collect a lot of data. I mean, think of it this way. I'm running a solar leasing business. That doesn't necessarily bring you any data. It's the fact that there's SIM cards and there's M-Pesa that make it a suddenly data-rich business. And if we didn't have all that, we'd be nowhere. I mean, just the power to convince investors or convince ourselves of the right decisions would be so much poorer if we didn't have mobile. I mean, it's a mobile technology that's gotten us into what is otherwise a very different and disconnected, conventionally disconnected business. So the power of data is huge. I think it convinces everybody involved in the business of the merit of what we're doing. The more impact-oriented investors, donors, grant providers are certainly interested in seeing the social impact. We can measure things like carbon reduction because we know exactly how long systems are being used and how much CO2 that would displace from kerosene. They also may be interested in the survey data that I was showing at the end, which is how many people are independently confirming, yes, I'm saving money compared to what I did before. Yes, my house is safer than it was before. Those sorts of metrics that really matter. And then obviously commercial investors are more interested in that first dashboard, which is how much money did you make today and can you cover costs? Kind of like Mike and Peter and other guys were saying yesterday about cash flow. So being able to have real-time cash data to run the business is obviously most important, but in the long run, people are then looking at, as equity investors, okay, how big could this get? So another data set that comes in is, how big is the market? Wait, you've got 40,000 customers. Yes, but there are 6 million unelectrified households. So wait, you're nowhere yet. You could go a lot bigger with that. Okay, well, that gives me the appetite to give you guys more money and get on with it and start getting bigger. So I guess data is huge to every backer, every stakeholder, and they may have different interests, but in the end of the day, the numbers count and speak for themselves.
Great. Karina, have a question here?
I just actually for Denis, on the back of the competition, I guess 2 questions around next steps. can we expect to see any of the entries become services in Côte d'Ivoire? And do you have any plans to replicate the competition?
Well, again, we are working on these two aspects. One, not really replicating exactly the same competition, but maybe doing it again in a slightly different way. It might be a different country, might be a different focus, and we are working on that. And certainly, regarding the second point, we are working on possible application being derived from what we got, including in Ivory Coast, based on some of the application we got. And we may make some announcements sometime, but I cannot tell you more right now.
Hi, I'm Jagdish from Vodafone India, and my question is for Yaya. When you are launching the Kilimo service, do you also consider bundling voice minutes and SMS and data as well, and in effect create a farmer's SIM rather than just a VAS service? Would that be something you would want to do in the future?
Yeah, excellent point. Actually, this is something which is already on our plans. So basically bundle voice, SMS, and data to the M-Agri service. We just think that it's going to help the service take off and then be in a position to fly by itself. So you want to basically give to the people what they already know, right, and bundle it to the M-Agri service that you're offering, which is quite new, and for which you want to build the ecosystem and you want to build the customer base.